So last week we had a lunch and learn on the basics of estate planning. So this week we wanted to review that lunch and learn and understand the three key components that we discussed. One, what should you be asking from your wealth advisor with regarding to your estate planning strategy? Number two, what are the legal documents that everybody should have? And number three, what are the legal documents that some people should have? So let's first and foremost define what is an estate. So real simply speaking, an estate is everything that you owe and everything that you own. When you lump all that together, an estate plan is what happens to this stuff at your death or incapacity to actually manage your wealth. So today I want to talk about three key components that we discussed at the Lunch and Learn last week. Point number one, what can your wealth advisor do for you? What can your 10 Capital advisor help out with regards to estate planning? And I would argue that it's more than just literally communicating between you and your estate planning attorney and painting a nice picture. But I do take it back to our process. And our planning process here at 10 Capital, you've heard us say it many times, is values, data, action. So we want to start first and foremost with understanding who you are at your core, the things that are important to you. Step number two in that planning process is quantifying the data. Understanding, getting key components of what are the liabilities, what do you owe, what do you own, and that allows us to help quantify an index and inventory everything in your financial life. And then it's connecting that to what do you want in the future. And I think this is a key component to estate planning, is understanding not just what the snapshot is of that inventory of assets and liabilities, but understanding 30 years down the road, what could this look like as far as growth of those assets along the way, which could potentially have a huge impact from an estate planning standpoint with regards to taxes that you may owe out in the future. So all of the data, all of the relationship that we have, being able to bring that and communicate that with you to your estate planning attorney will not just cut down on billable hours that you'll have to pay that estate planning attorney, but really help smooth out the process of your experience with us and relaying that information and being an advocate for you. The second point here, let's talk about the documents that everybody should have in place, the legal documents regardless of net worth. Literally every single one of our clients need this, and unfortunately we see a lot of people that just don't have them in place. So we would really like to see every single client have this in place. But first and foremost is a last will and testament. Virtually everybody's familiar with this, but really that's the legal document that details how you want your property distributed to you, to your heirs, after your death. So it's really the wishes of your wishes with your estate. Second document is the healthcare power of attorney. So really what this document is a legal document that allows an individual to empower another person to make healthcare decisions for you if you are unable to do so for yourself. This document will allow the person that you appoint legally to make decisions on your behalf from a healthcare standpoint. The third document that we want everybody to have in place is your financial power of attorney. So this is basically the same as a healthcare power of attorney, just everything except for healthcare. So this has everything to do with potentially paying bills, collecting life insurance, everything else financially, everything else within the estate outside of healthcare decisions. That's what the financial power of attorney does. And fourth, and this is one that unfortunately, this is kind of a morbid subject. And so we see a lot of people that may have the first three in place, but not the last one. And this is your healthcare directive. And this is hugely important. My mom actually had early onset Alzheimer's. And so luckily she filled out her healthcare directive prior to going to a state where she couldn't actually make healthcare decisions for herself, up to things like, hey, the morbid conversation of, do you want to be in a vegetative state, or do you want to be taken off life support? All these kind of tough conversations. That all sits within the healthcare directive. So think of the healthcare directive as guiding the healthcare power of attorney in the decisions that are being made for your benefit. And third point I wanted to discuss today, documents that some people should have, not everybody. So ultimately a trust allows you to be very specific about how, when, and whom to distribute your estate and your assets to. There can be dozens of other reasons to own a trust. We're not of the mindset that everybody needs a trust. There are attorneys that do think everybody needs a trust. I can tell you there are simpler, cheaper ways to get the same outcome without a trust for certain individuals. But I'm just going to throw some ideas as to why you may want to consider a trust. So trusts avoid probate. So especially if you're in the state of California, you don't want to go through that probating process. But the state of Washington is fairly cheap and quick when it comes to probate. So you may or may not need a trust for that specific reason. Helping reduce estate taxes. So if you have an estate and you live in the state of Washington over $2.5 million or federally over $22.5 million, considering a trust to minimize your estate tax liability or the big check that has to be written out of your estate to cover those estate taxes makes a ton of sense. It's probably the highest use case. But then even controlling assets from the grave. So if you have a trust in place, if you have minor kids that aren't of the age of majority, or maybe you don't want them to realize their inheritance until they're of an older age, say 30 or 40 years old, which is pretty normal. For example, if we're thinking about an alternative to a trust, think about your beneficiaries on your IRA or investment accounts. Those supersede any will and or trust. It'll bypass probate. It's simple, it's cheap, and it gets the job done quicker than anything else. So when we think about alternatives to trusts, these are just a few concepts to consider. Trusts make sense for certain circumstances, but not every circumstance. Talk to your advisor, talk to your estate planning attorney as to whether or not they may make sense for you and your personal estate plan. And then finally, talking through ongoing, we always say here, planning is not a one-time thing. So understanding that you may create an estate plan, but hopefully you're gonna be around for another 10, 20, 30 plus years. And so reviewing that estate plan would make sense. So rule of thumb is either when major life events occur, at least every 5 years is a good rule of thumb to revisit these as well, because at least from a legal standpoint, they wanna see updated healthcare POAs, healthcare directives, ideally every 5 years. That's what the courts want to see. They don't necessarily want to see a healthcare, power of attorney that was put into place 2 decades ago. So updating the legal documents every, let's call it 5 years, is probably another good rule of thumb if another major life event doesn't occur in between that. In closing, I hope you found the Lunch and Learn useful. We do have a handful of slides that we went through. If anybody needs any information, please reach out to your advisor here at 10 Capital. I am the Director of Retirement Planning. You can always reach out to me as well. I'm happy to pass information along as well. But we hope you found this insightful and hope you have a wonderful weekend.